Thank you.
Being President. I rise to speak on the Agriculture Legislation Amendment Bill 2022. The Liberals and Nationals will not be opposing this bill. As Ms Bath said before, there are an amendment that she is introducing, and I support that fully. Now, this is quite a large omnibus bill that seeks to amend 11 different acts. It will bring about many changes, some of which I will address in my contribution today. Broadly speaking, these changes relate to inspection and enforcement powers of authorised officers, controls for noxious weeds and pests, and registration of veterinary practitioners. The first amendment that I wish to touch on are the amendments to the Catchment and Land Protection Act 1994. This bill amends the Act to improve controls for noxious weeds and pest animals and to strengthen inspection and enforcement powers. It also amends offences for the spreading of noxious weeds. It inserts a new section, 58C, that allows the Minister to declare a state prohibited weed or pest animal to be a notifiable species. It also gives the Minister power to revoke that notifiable species listing if the weed is no longer a state prohibited weed or it has been eradicated. The effect of this is that any person who comes across one of those notifiable species must, without delay, notify the Secretary by the quickest means of communication available. It seeks to strengthen oversight and management of problem weeds and pest animals, which can only be a good thing given the toll these things take both on our environment and our agricultural industry. This bill makes clear the penalties for buying and selling noxious weeds, which is currently 122 penalty units, but soon to be up to 480 penalty units. The penalties differ depending on the category of weed. At nearly 182 a penalty unit, that is a fine of over $87,000 for buying or selling a noxious weed or seed. That seems quite significant. However, the diseases that come from noxious plants and pest animals are incredibly dangerous to our agricultural industries. They have the potential to wipe out an entire industry. There are many successful farms across the Eastern Victoria region, my region, and today the Chamber is very lucky that it has two Eastern region representatives promoting it and talking about our wonderful area. Now, Gippsland has a booming beef and dairy industry, and also potatoes are one of many of the specialties that come from the Narrabeen and Bass electoral communities. Agriculture and farming is the bread and butter for so many of my constituents in Eastern Victoria region. And it is important that we do crack down on noxious weeds and pests, so as they are definitely a threat to these industries. There are also many community groups in Eastern Victoria region that focus on improving our environment by eradicating weeds, and I want to take some time to talk about some of those today. There's some amazing volunteer groups that come to mind, such as the Friends of Sassafras Creek, the Community Weed Alliance of the Dandenongs, and the Friends of Gembrook Park. I know that the Friends of Gembrook Park were recently calling on locals to help remove English holly from Gembrook Lake Park, and I'd like to congratulate them on eliminating most of the English holly from the park and for their ongoing work in removing this invasive plant. Now, the Community Weed Alliance of the Dandenongs, they also do a wonderful job of educating the community on the importance of eradicating weeds through various public talks. Where I live in the Dandenong Ranges, we have huge problems with English ivy and wandering trad, just so invasive all throughout the Dandenongs. Now, I myself have been fortunate enough to attend one of these excellent community education programs. I learnt so much. So I just commend the Community Weed Alliance of the Dandenongs for putting this, these programs together for the community to attend. Now, there are many other groups, of course, right across the Eastern Victoria region that do this type of work. So just thank you so much for all of those groups that take the time to do the wonderful work they do. Now, if you think about it, if all of these volunteer hours were put together for removing all the weeds that they do, it would come at huge cost. So if you look at it in that perspective and then sort of consider the levels of the fines, anyone looking to buy and sell harmful plants, will be met with a huge fine. So it does make sense to me why the fines are so big, considering the issues that these weeds and pests can cause. Now, one of the main issues with weeds control in the Dandenongs is the fact we are surrounded by state-owned national parks. In fact, that is an issue right across Eastern Victoria region. State governments are responsible for managing the risk of invasive plants and animals. This is sadly not what happens in reality. One of the worst neighbours you could have is the state government, because that parcel of land will most likely be riddled with weeds and pest animals that are not controlled in the ways they are meant to be. Now, under the Catchment and Land Protection Act of 1994, all landowners, public and private, have an obligation to the environment to manage their weeds. Yet the state government don't seem to think that this applies to them. These weeds only spread, making things more difficult for surrounding landowners and the environment. Now, the next amendment I wish to discuss is the changes to the Agricultural and Veterinary Chemicals Control of Use Act 1992. Under this bill, authorised officers will be given increased inspection powers. This includes the ability to inspect any part of a property to ensure correct chemical product labelling is used. Now, officers can also enter properties if they reasonably suspect that equipment at the place has been used to manufacture chemical products, or that there is likely to be contaminated produce on the farm. They can ask questions, they can take photos, they can take samples. There's quite a lot that they can do. Now, one of the main concerns that has been raised with me is that officers will be able to enter homes. However, the legislation makes clear that the powers do not include the power to enter the residence. They may enter and search the shed on a property, for example, but not the home. Now, the Liberals and the Nationals do have some concern around the notice requirements for landowners, because in some situations the landowner does not live on the farm or may not be present. Authorised officers can enter the land without the occupier being present, but must, on leaving, leave a notice setting out the time of entry, the purpose, a description of all things done while on the land, and the time of their departure. Now, I have some problems with this. This brings to mind the issue that I previously raised in this chamber of the Pakenham East property acquisitions, where Level Crossings acquired properties to make way for their new train stations. Now, some of my constituents were not home when the state representatives knocked on the doors to inform them they would be taking the land. Residents left to find out what was happening in the newspaper the next morning. When I raised this issue in the chamber, the response I received was to the effect that notices were put in the letterbox if residents were not home. Now, that may have been the case, but whether that is fair and what Victorians should expect their government to do is another question. In this unfortunate case, they did not check the letterbox before reading the morning newspaper. I personally do not think that a note in a letterbox or attached to a fence post is always appropriate. There are too many what-ifs, especially when these decisions impact on people's livelihoods. If a notice is nailed to a fence post on a large property and it rains or the landowner does not see it, what happens then? It becomes a bit of a he said, she said situation, and opens a door for conflict around these powers to inspect. Now, my colleagues in the other place asked questions around this and were told common sense would prevail. I think it would be more common sense to make it clear in the legislation exactly how non-present landowners will be kept informed of what has been done on their property. Now, the last thing I wish to quickly discuss is amendments to the Drugs, Poison and Controlled Substances Act 1981. This will allow an animal health emergency to be declared, which means vital medicines that are required in times of emergency are able to be provided quickly. East Gippsland was devastated by fires 2 years ago, and many animals were harmed or seriously injured. A lot of these animals were taken to the animal hospital at Hillsville Sanctuary or helped by various local vets. Now, these changes will ensure that drugs are available on the ground in bushfires and emergencies. I know this definitely would be very helpful in Eastern Victoria region 2 years ago, and I'm glad to see that this is incorporated into this bill. Now, there are many aspects of this bill, and it is difficult to discuss them all with the time that I have, but overall, the new powers for authorised officers should help prevent invasive pests and diseases being spread and act as a protection to our vital farming and agricultural industries. Now, on one hand, we have the government introducing new powers, and also on the other hand, they are cutting jobs from Agriculture Victoria. And as Ms Barth said in her contribution, it's just like the funding has been completely gutted and nothing in the budget. So, and just in February, Agriculture Victoria were looking for workers to enter into early retirement to redirect the money elsewhere. There is no point introducing these extra powers if there is no staff to enforce them. I would urge the government to stop cutting funds from agriculture in Victoria. Our farmers and their families work incredibly hard, and they are worthy of support. I'll leave my contribution there.